So, folks, have a seat for a few minutes. So, at each of the masses today, we've been speaking about the parish evangelization cells. And for some of you, you're quite familiar with it. Others are going, what is this? It's a strange emblem. But I'll explain a little bit. About 6 years ago, we started a movement here in the parish called the parish cells. And those of you who know the brothers well and me, I asked that question about 1 million times to people over the years. What is the fruit of an apple tree? And you might be thinking, is it a trick question? Is it a banana, pineapple? I'll come back to that question, but meditate on what's the fruit of an apple tree. But this is from 2017, a document from the Bishop of Brentwood. And basically, he was on a mission to help the diocese to restructure. And in this restructuring, because Brentwood is a huge diocese, you can see it covers all of Essex and a chunk of East London, a lot of people there. And times are changing. Less vocations, less Catholics, buildings are getting old, downsizing, adapting to the changing world that we live in. But in Pope Francis's, you could say, foundational encyclical, Evangelii Gaudium, he basically says, okay, we can restructure, we can downsize, we can adapt. But without evangelization, it dies. So restructuring and evangelization go together. And there was a call from Pope Francis to all of us, especially here at St. Anthony's, to make evangelization at the heart of who we are. But COVID got in the way. And a lot of the great cells that had started, that were meeting, certain survived, but others died during the time of COVID. And amazingly, some actually grew, but overall, it was a difficult time. For any kind of communal gathering, COVID was a very challenging time. So we, as Father Philip Thomas was saying at the beginning, we're trying to relaunch this beautiful and powerful movement called the parish cells. Now, in the Diocese of Brentwood, there's about 250,000 Catholics, 250,000 people. And of those, 1 in 5 practice their faith. And which is quite high, actually. And in this diocese, we have 100 priests currently, which is quite high as well. I was in New Zealand recently, and in that diocese, they had, I think, 40 priests for a place bigger than Essex. In 2025, we will be 75 priests, because many are in their 70s and close to retirement. And by 2035, we'll be just 50. So that's kind of scary because we're an endangered species. I was saying this morning, I should put a sign here, please don't shoot, because I'm an endangered species. And, but it's true, we're called to pass on the flame and the torch to you guys, because the whole of Catholicism needs to step up so that our church can continue and to grow and to be there for the next generation. Now, if we were to distill the words of Pope Francis, and actually of the last 3 popes, and even 4 with Pope Paul VI, you could say, kind of paraphrasing, that their essential message was, we have to make missionary disciples. It's no longer possible to be a spectator on the sidelines. We need to follow Jesus, get involved, do. And the gifts that God has put in you, you need to put them into practice, whether it be to sing, whether it be to read, whether it be to serve, whether it be to cook, whether it be whatever your gift is, you need to put it at the service of the church. And Jesus himself said it in the Gospel of Matthew, one of the last words he ever says, go out to all the nations and make disciples. So that's our calling. And this is not an option. Without this, our church in a generation or two can disappear. So that's why it's an urgent call. So to get back to my question about the apple tree, if you answered an apple, you're partly right, because an apple is the fruit of an apple tree, but it's not the full story. An apple tree gives life to another apple tree, and that's the cycle. An apple is made to give life. And that cycle of life is the exact same cycle that we can see in the calling of Paul VI and the popes in the last. Because in the Catholic Church, we have lots of apples, 1.2 billion apples. But how many of those apples are producing new apple trees? And that's your calling, is in your life, in your way, in your family, in your workplace, in your church. I am called to give life and to pass on the flame of my faith to other people. And this is like the small print, but you can see the cycle of Evangelii Nuntiandi from Pope Paul VI, one of the fruits of Vatican II, where you become a Catholic, you're baptized, you enter the church, for example, you're welcomed by a community, you get to know your faith, you grow in your faith, the sacraments, and you get stronger, and then you evangelize others. You were evangelized, and you evangelize others as well. But the problem is that this calling to evangelize, which is at the heart of who we are as Catholics, 62% of Catholics never speak to anybody about their faith. Because that's the way it is. It's a very private thing. I just keep it to myself. I go to Mass. I don't need to speak to anybody. It's my private faith. But that's where Pope Francis challenges us, because he says that needs to change or we will die. And he takes the example of Easter night with the candle. You know, when you light your candle in the pitch dark church here, it's really impressive here in St. Anthony's because it's such a big church, it's so dark. And imagine you have a light and somebody asks you for a light and you go, no, I only keep my own light. He uses that as an example to show that's what it's like when we don't give life and pass on and share our faith by opening our mouth and our lips to speak. So our faith, says Pope Francis, is personal, but it's not private. This guy preaches every day in Stratford. Everybody's seen him, I'm sure. If you go to the Stratford station, and I was telling them this morning how I was going to the airport a few months ago at 5 in the morning. He was setting up. You have to admire these guys. 62% of Catholics never speak about their faith. 100% of Pentecostals speak about their faith. Maybe over the top. But we need to change. We need to find that way of spreading the good news in our own way, in our own churches, in our own. And the example I often give is, people say, oh, I have my Uncle Johnny. He's a great man of faith, but he never speaks to anybody. He's just private. He goes to Mass and he minds his own business. Well, the generation of Johnny is just not good enough. It has to change. Because the question I ask is, who spoke to Johnny? Somebody spoke to Johnny that he has the faith. Maybe a teacher, maybe a parent, a friend. Somebody spoke to him. And somebody spoke to each one of you and told you of the good news. That's why you're here tonight. And the early Christians, if they hadn't spoken, we wouldn't even exist. So speaking about our faith is really essential. And to get back to the cells, then the cells in the parish here give us the means as Catholics to evangelize in our own way. It doesn't have to be dramatic and like these dynamic street preachers. In our own way, in our homes, in our little cells, it can be very, very powerful just by what? Opening our hearts to our brothers and sisters. Now, the elephant and the mouse here is an image where you have a big church and small church. And a healthy church has both. You have a big Sunday gathering and you have meetings in the home. That's what the early church did. In the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 5 and chapter 2, you can see they met in the temple courts, big numbers, and they met in the home as well. And you need both. And why is that? It's because if you come to Mass on Sunday, you receive communion, you hear the word, and you hear a message from the priest, and you go home and your soul is at peace, but you never really met anybody. You might have shaken hands with somebody, but there's no true encounters. And statistics show that if somebody is new to a church and they come to Mass on Sunday and they don't meet anybody, they probably won't be back. So there's a need for encounter, because if you meet somebody and there's some kind of meaningful encounter, there's a 60 to 80% chance that you'll come back again. So the encountering is very, very powerful and very important. And that's why the cells play their part, because if you're ill, I won't necessarily know that. If you're feeling low and down, I won't necessarily, or the priest won't know that, unless you tell us. If you've lost your job and you're struggling financially, we won't know that. But if you're part of a cell, they will know. And they'll visit you, and they'll strengthen you, and they'll call you, and they'll encourage you. You have a really powerful little group who are praying for you and close to you. And after the communion today, you'll see one or two will come up and speak about that. And the lives have been changed because it really gives a foundation to our life as Catholics, at the same time allowing us to evangelize. So the image I often use is Cheers. Now, if you're of this generation, you have no clue what Cheers is, but in my generation, it was a big TV hit where there was a song where everybody, sometimes you want to go, where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you. I heard one came. So it's powerful when you enter a community where people know you and you can feel at peace. Now, if you invite somebody for the first time to church on a Sunday, they can be overawed by this, by the size of the building, the music, and not meeting anybody. And they probably won't come back. But if you invite them into your home for a cell meeting and they have a cup of tea and a chat, it's very accessible and very powerful and very meaningful and very fruitful in the way that we evangelize. And to meet in the homes, by speaking with those who live in the cells, first of all, it's powerful for your own life because you get nourished and you grow in your faith and you grow in love for your community. It's powerful for our parish because the cells are the backbone and the building blocks of the bigger building of the church. And finally, it's a powerful way of spreading the good news and bringing new people into our community in a loving and meaningful way. And in these meetings, what is it? Food, prayer, fellowship, sharing, formation, evangelization. And you got everything there when it comes to who we are as Catholics. And the evangelization side is sorely missing for us. And in our world today, as I was saying, true encounter is important so people can feel that they belong. And in our 21st century, belonging is not an easy, it's really important, but it's not easy for us as Catholics to grasp that, because when I was growing up, you have the system here of you behave, you believe, and you belong, which means if you behave and you believe, that makes you a Catholic and you're part of the community. That's no longer really sturdy today. More today is more people need to feel that they belong. And then their behavior changes. And then their faith deepens. But that belonging is central today. And that's what the cells are trying to do to help us to belong in our own community. And in these cells then, the talents of each person is developed, whether it be reading, whether it be sharing, whether it be cooking, whether it be compassion. Each person has a gift, and the cells help us to develop those gifts. And if you're shy to sing, you can sing with a little group of 5 or 6 people and get your confidence. And one day, why not? Maybe you could join the choir here in the parish. So don't forget that image of the apple tree. And after communion today, 1 or 2 of our cell members will come up and speak briefly to you about their experience. Maybe Jesus is calling you to enter a cell group, and just pick up the phone and answer that call. And if not, God will find you eventually. So Heavenly Father, we ask you to bless us as we relaunch our cells, and that we may become conscious that these cells are essential for the future of our church here in Forest Gate, of our parish, of our diocese, and indeed the church in the 21st century. Amen.